Welcome to the Tales from Eden podcast. Eden Holistic Pet Foods are creating an exciting range of podcasts to help inform and educate our listeners on the benefits of optimum nutrition for their pets. Eden are 100% passionate about animal health and nutrition. Today we're going to be discussing what makes Eden the King of Kibble, talking about the process of development of kibble and stripping back some of those negative points surrounding current trends of dog nutrition within the pet food industry. Now we're really lucky to have Managing Director, Founder and Pioneer Paul Conquest. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, thanks for inviting me.
We also have Michelle
Bugliarello.
And that's only because I can't pronounce it, so she's very happily put that word in for me. Chief Operating Officer, a driving force with a focus on developing the brand. Eden Holistic Pet Foods are forerunners in the natural development of the ancestral diet and have over a 10-year history supporting animal health through nutrition. So let's get straight into it and explode the myths surrounding kibble. Paul, how is kibble made? And let's talk about some of those myths, those negatives and their positives about food production.
Thank you. Yes, extrusion's a process which was mainly used in the early 70s as a way of preserving cereal grain. And you saw products like mixer biscuits come to the market. Later on, as the technology improved, they found the ability to add meat to that process. Originally it was dried meat, and later on fresh meat became available. A lot of brands around about the 20% mark, and then later on you saw around the 50% mark. When Eden started, which was in 2011, the technology had come to the UK to actually produce an 80% meat content food. And that's what we did. As far as we were aware, we were the first in Europe to produce an 80% meat content dried food for dogs and cats. In fact, we actually pushed the limit even more for cats to 85%. So that's where it comes from. And in essence, it's a very convenient way of having a high meat content food for your cats and dogs that's as close to what I call the ancestral diet. So what does that mean? Well, it means if we weren't feeding your animal as humans, they would have to go out and kill prey. And that's what they would do. So what I tried to do was copy that profile as closely as I could.
And what drove you to actually first start developing this food? Was it a personal experience? Was it? It
was, yes. One of our dogs had a liver tumour. And it was actually a conversation with a local vet who was an avid raw feeder, and said, look, raw food is a dog's natural food. It wasn't particularly convenient, of course, to have a freezer or feed a dog that volume of food. So that really set about the task of trying to mimic raw food in a dried kibble. And that's essentially what we did.
So from the point of view of how the process of how it's cooked, we know there's been negativity in the marketplace at the moment from overcooking and different things. How do Eden combat that?
Okay, so the latest processes, the latest extruders as they're called, cook at a relatively low temperature, around 82 degrees. And it's under pressure, so it's a bit like a pressure cooker would be in the home. And the whole point of that, of course, is to sterilise the food. And of course, if you look at raw feeding, one of the main disadvantages is potential contamination from things like salmonella. But of course, if the food's cooked, which we use as humans quite regularly, I think probably only sushi, raw fish is the time we don't. So mainly we cook most of our food, and it's the same for dogs. So cooking the food simply sterilises it, which means it can be stored in a dry place for a significant period of time, which makes it very convenient.
So let's now talk about where we source the ingredients from, because I think that's really key and beneficial in the marketplace at the moment. And I know, Michelle, this is one of your champion points.
Yeah, I'm absolutely passionate about kibble because it is such a nutritionally complete food and so incredibly convenient, which is what a lot of our customers enjoy about our product. What's really important to us though is that we use the absolute best quality ingredients in our kibble. So what you see when you buy kibble is that brown biscuit. What we see is our manufacturer going out to accredited farms and fisheries, collecting fillets of meat from source, transporting that back in an ambient and cooled wagon. So we've got full traceability. We know where the meat came from. We know how it was transported. Then they bring that to the manufacturing plant. And let me just explain what a fillet of meat might be. So we might go to a fishery and you'll see a beautiful salmon fillet, deboned and ready to go. And the best cut of that salmon fillet will probably go to somewhere like Marks and Spencer's that we will buy and cook and enjoy, maybe on our barbecues. The next fillets, still great human grade salmon, might go towards a ready meal or a different type of food production. And those final bits that are maybe less attractive and M&S aren't using and we're not using for the ready meals, but it's still that salmon fillet that comes to us. So it's a human grade meat collected from source, and it prevents wastage of that beautiful piece of salmon. That comes to the manufacturing plant, and then that is processed to produce the kibble.
And I think in many ways this is what people don't understand. The sort of the exact science that goes in, from farm to fork, really, when you look at it, because we could eat it, we could take it home and, and have it as a luxury biscuit or whatever.
And let's think, we all cook our food.
Yeah.
So we will go out and buy a lovely piece of salmon, and before we eat it, we cook it. So people sometimes hear the word processed, and that's one of those myths when people talk about kibble. They say, oh, it's highly processed. No, it's just not. It's just cooked to create a really bacterial, secure and convenient form of food. But it's still packed with all those beautiful goodies, all that beautiful fresh fruit, herbs, botanicals and fresh meat.
And when you think about it, when they talk about smell and when they talk about taste, there is a vast difference between your food and other kibbles.
Definitely. Not all kibbles are the same.
Yeah.
We talk about this quite frequently, and one of the things that Paul educated me on is, as a customer, turn that bag of kibble around and have a look at what those ingredients are, because you have to put those ingredients on the back of the packaging, percentage by weight. So if it says meat, chicken, fish, beef, venison first, that's full of meaty goodness. If it says rice or white potato, it's a lower quality kibble.
And going back to that, thinking about white potato and rice, Paul, when we talk about 80-20, what does 80-20 mean to me as a customer when I'm looking at the bag, etc.?
Yeah, initially it was an internal term that defined the meat content. So the process is measured at something called mixing bowl, which is pre-cooking. And 80% of the volume of the food was meat. And as simple as that. 20%, that was made up of sweet potato, which you do need to actually form the biscuit. Perhaps some other vegetables as well. Some nutrient pack, maybe some joint herbs as well. So additional stuff made up the other 20%.
Okay.
And what you're getting from that is optimum nutrition. So when we talk about the variances in kibble, lots of kibbles call themselves complete, but there's a minimum compliance standard for being complete. What we offer is optimum nutrition. And that's the difference in different types of food.
Well, with you guys, though, what really fascinates me is when you look at other brands and they use the word optimum and they use the word 80-20, etc., etc., you are really using human-grade meat. You're really looking at the process of the dog from the ancestral diet and how even the dog processes the food. And I think sometimes people don't understand that. So what sort of...
Yeah, I mean, if you have to, any textbook you pick up on a cat or a dog will show that the jaw doesn't move sideways, so it can't grind things like cereal grain. The teeth are incisors, which are designed to bite and tear and swallow, so there's no chewing as such. You might see a dog gnaw a bone, but that's slightly different. That's not the food as such. The stomach acid is extremely powerful, pH 1 to 2, and the intestines are very short, and that's because fat and protein are metabolized at the top of the intestinal tract, so you don't need a long intestines. And you compare that, say, with a rabbit, which has a huge stomach and a very long intestine. There is a trend in the industry at the moment to try and reclassify dogs as omnivores, which is extremely convenient for the manufacturers, of course, because it means everything from the human food chain can then be fed to dogs. In reality, my view is for optimum food, the dog is most definitely a carnivore. That's not to say it can't survive on a non-meat diet or a low-meat diet, but in terms of optimum nutrition, giving the dog the very best you can, a high meat content food is certainly the most appropriate.
And basically, when you've introduced your 60-40 as well, what was the reasoning behind the 60-40?
Well, the 60-40 is a semi-moist food, and it was a little bit of an experiment for one of our chihuahuas who unfortunately at a very old age had teeth were a little bit suspect. So I went about producing a soft food. Now that's slightly different. The most meat I can actually fit in the soft food is 60%, which is why the 60% comes from. It has 18% moisture in there and another substance which is vegetable glycerol, which is like a fat, and that's what makes it soft. So again, it was about fitting the most meat I could in a semi-moist food, which in this instance comes out at 60-40.
And when you look at the flavours, I mean, they're amazing flavours that you've got in there. It's like going to an a la carte restaurant for me.
Yeah, we've got salmon, we've got venison, we've had wild boar at the moment, we've got quail, duck, to name but a few. So they're all novel proteins. So you might find in a lot of kibbles, they're very much based on chicken, beef, pork. We're using the very best meats, and a lot of those are lean meats as well, which are really beneficial to the pets.
Yeah, there's also some logic. The original brand was chicken and fish. That's what we started with. What we found was a very small proportion of dogs were intolerant to chicken, so we made a fish one, an 80% fish, so there was no chicken in that recipe, and then the country cuisine was the final one, which didn't have fish or chicken in. So from an exclusion diet, although you're not using single proteins, you could give a diet that excluded certain proteins if you wanted to. So there was some logic in the recipes that
so
followed.
Like you say, from the ingredients, you are giving the optimal in botanicals and nutrients, essential nutrients, from the meat content, really going back to how the dogs are developed over time as well, and their essential diets.
And also, when I came into the business, I didn't understand nutrition as Paul did. I mean, spent a huge amount of time and thought developing a food specifically based on the anatomy of dogs. Went to the very best manufacturers that have their own nutritionalists, laboratories that check the safety of the food. For me, as a normal consumer, I just wanted a food that was packed full of beauty, almost like I could say I was going to a supermarket to prepare a meal for my dog. What would I be choosing? I'd be choosing duck and rabbit and wild boar and pheasant and salmon. I'd want really gorgeous apples and cranberries and blueberries in there with some botanicals as well. I'd want it to smell and taste delicious. You're getting all that, but in a little bite-sized kibble that you can store conveniently. And when you put it in that bowl every single day, you know that dog is getting a complete and balanced meal, which for me is perfection. But there's a food for everyone. Some people love raw, and if they know what they're doing with raw and they can balance that diet and they can keep it safe and stored correctly, brilliant. Some people might feed a wet food, but to us, kibble is optimum. And we sell premium kibble. But the interesting thing about premium kibble, because it's packed full of goodness, you feed less, which is another interesting part of our food.
And also, I am going to have to bring up the poop bit. I'm very sorry, I'm going to have to bring it up because we've had so many conversations in the past about carrots. Now, I'll have to say, I used to feed my dog raw. You know, I've been on holiday and gone into the back of the car and it's been a bloody mess. And the mess has been a bloody mess, I can tell you, because the backs leak, you know, once it starts defrosting, etc. And also, when you put a carrot in your dog, whatever size it is, and not that I go around looking at poop all the time, but it comes out the same size. So, you know, they're not processing the nutrients as much.
No. And Paul will take you through the technicals of that. But just from a customer perspective, you know, our customer care team would tell you that one of the biggest conversations they have on a daily basis is poop. And what goes in has got to come out. And if you feed a great quality food that you're feeding less of, and the dog's drawing on all that nutrition, less comes out. It's not as smelly.
Yeah, the term is loose fibrous stools. So if you're feeding a cereal grain, if you think the intestines of the dog are that short, basically it just passes through. So you see large and fibrous stools. Over a period of time, obviously when you move to a meat-based diet, you would really want to do it over a number of weeks. It's not something you would do instantly. You might have a little bit of loose stools as the dog readapts to the meat. But then what you find is you have very small, hard-formed stools because the dog's absorbing the nutrients. And it's very interesting, and I'm certainly not making any claims, this is purely anecdotal, that when we started, a lot of our customers had dogs that were poorly. And on going on to the food, their health significantly improved, and that's just purely me, looking at the feedback, looking at the calls that we had. Even to one point, and I actually don't cry very often, but it was quite emotional. It was a handwritten letter from a lady who was just about to have her Cavalier put to sleep, and they found our food. The dog went on the food, and bounced back to life again and lived for another 6 months. And this letter was thanking us for that 6 months of extra life that the dog had. So again, I'm not making any claims, make that clear, but certainly the feedback we get from customers is that the health of the dog is significantly improved over a very short period of time.
But if you look at nutrition in general, and I'm no nutritionalist in any way whatsoever, you know, when sort of people are saying about feeding, about fresh vegetables, about botanics, about nutrients, about eating the best meat and it being free range and different things. Actually, you're doing that just standard as a brand, really.
That's right. It was about what would a dog eat if it wasn't for humans? What's its natural profile of food? And there was a study in America for feeding zoo animal carnivores. And what we did, we copied that as close as we could, and produced a food with a similar profile. It's not perfect, but it's as close as we could get. And that's really as simple as it is. It's just feed what a dog would normally eat in the wild.
Now, another thing that's out in the industry at the moment, and we've got to talk about it, it's on all the adverts. You know, we've alluded to it earlier, that if you put a bowl of wet food or if you put a bowl of raw food there and you put a bowl of a kibble, you know, the dog isn't going to go towards the kibble. What do we feel about it? I know what I feel about it. What do you feel about it?
Well, again, I haven't seen those experiments. I mean, raw, I think generally it's what the dog prefers. So there's no doubt that a raw diet is a natural diet. But it's very difficult to actually get that right from an owner's point of view, because there's no guarantee what the nutrients in that meat is. Assuming it had a natural life, which it probably didn't, it would be the perfect food. But of course, our animals are farmed. The feed that the animals have may or may not be natural, and that's reflected in the nutrient profile of the meat. What you get in the kibble is a very standardised product. So you not only have the dried meat in there, but you also have a nutrient pack which guarantees all of the nutrient levels. So, and again, if you look at our nutrient pack, we use what we call an organic compound, which means that the absorption levels of the nutrients are as high as they possibly can be.
And you're right, but there's a food for every dog.
Yeah.
And what we see sometimes as the customer, not the consumer, which the dog is, we just see a brown, boring kibble. When you explode that kibble, it is full of fabulous ingredients. And dogs are probably a lot smarter than we think. How do they see food? They see it through the nose. They can smell the aromas that are packed within that. They understand the goodness of it. So we might look at wet food and be able to see some carrots and apples and think that looks better to us. But a lot of this is based on what we see and feel about it, not our pets.
And that's very much an emotional buy, isn't it? Which, you know, with the trend to name foods after, you know, what you would buy from that aspect. But in the end, it's looking after what is the best food to put into your dog.
Yeah. But kibble, to be honest, is what you'd buy for your dog. You just don't see it in that way. But like I say, if you did break down all of those ingredients, who wouldn't want to give their dog duck, rabbit, wild boar, pheasant, salmon, apples, cranberries, sweet potatoes, a bit of gravy on the top, cooked down into a beautiful meal? It looked like a roast dinner, but you just see it as a piece of kibble. And the reason it's kibble is it preserves the life of that product. It means it's safe and secure to feed your dog. You know you're getting the nutrition in every single meal. It's the perfect food.
One thing we did go over earlier was transportation of the food and everything. And I know for a fact, from a traceability point of view, you have complete traceability of where your food comes from as well. And I think that's really important to get over.
Yeah, it's really important. And the food is tested as well. So the food is tested by the manufacturer. When we get new food in, it's tested by ourselves. So it is, I don't know what the word is it biosecure or?
Yeah. I mean, the human grade process is really what it follows. It's only when it's finally packed into bags does it step outside the human food chain. But up to that point, it's exactly the same as human food would be processed. Yeah.
And why do you think that people supplement Eden to do with the raw diet?
I think Eden's one of the closest, well, it is the closest kibble to a raw diet because of the amount of fresh meat that's packed into that kibble. So we get so much feedback, particularly when we go to shows and events. People will come over and say, to be honest, I'm a raw feeder, but I always have a bag of Eden because if I'm going away, if I'm going out for the day, if the dog's going into kennels and I don't know that they're secure around raw feeding, I'll use Eden as a substitute.
Which is a great advocate, really, because we're not saying you need to move away from raw foods, because if your dog's happy on it, why change in many ways? Eden is a great alternative and works really well within your lifestyle, because we have to think about our lifestyles from that aspect.
Absolutely. We say that we're passionate about pets. We strive to see pets thrive.
Okay.
Yeah, so
let's talk, Michelle, let's talk about raw without the thaw.
Yes, because Eden is such a fantastic alternative to raw feeding because it's so close in terms of that fresh meat content. And in the Eden offices, we're absolutely passionate about pets. We have our pets in the offices. We've got a Hall of Fame on the wall. For us, it's all about supporting pets to thrive in life and also offering pet parents, pet owners, the opportunity to lead a full life with their pet. And that's not just about the lifespan of the animal. It's if you find raw feeding tough, so you've got to get up early in the morning, it takes you quite a long time to make the meals, it's all over the boot of your car, and that's quite stressful and difficult. Substitute with Eden, which is a great alternative. It's convenient. You save that 20 minutes in the morning, go out on a beautiful long walk, go to the beach, take your dog down to the coffee shop with you so you can have your breakfast alongside them and then their bowl of Eden. So it's all about creating an environment where the dog is happy, thriving, healthy, active and ready for a day. And you enjoy your life with them. And if you enjoy your life more because you get to give them a convenient food and that works for you, and it definitely works for your pet because Eden is optimum nutrition, that's what it's all about. Everybody's a winner.
So let's just go back and talk about meat content and the difference between fresh meat and dried meat.
Yes, it's an interesting question, that, because obviously there is a slightly different process when you look at the processing fresh meat than you do with the pre-dried or meat meal, as it's sometimes called. Meat meal is meat that's been dried over a period of time, and I think the temperature is 150 degrees until the moisture is removed, and then it's in a dried form. Now, when we first formulated the original, I wanted the protein level to be similar to that in raw prey, and the only way I could actually do that was to add meat meal to it. So we had, I think it was about 36% fresh meat. The rest was made up with meat meal to bring the protein level up to 42%, which is what I considered the minimum. If you look at raw prey, and bear in mind they measure it something called dried mass, which means that they always remove all the moisture. Raw prey can be anything between high 40s and low 80s. Usually the smaller the animal, the higher the protein content. And of course, different parts of the animal will have different protein levels as well. So the liver and the kidneys, etc., are much higher protein than, say, the breast meat. And there was a very interesting program called Living with Wolves, where the guy actually was part of a wolf pack in, I think it was down in Cornwall. And he had to, as leader of the pack, he would have first choice of the kill. And that would have been the liver, the heart, and various other offal parts, which we don't consider high value. But of course, in dog world, they contain the most protein, so they are valuable. But coming back to the question, initially we mixed it together to give the correct protein level that I wanted. As time has gone on, there's pre-extrusion technology, which has allowed moisture to be removed from fresh meat before it's cooked, and that's why you see a lot more now higher fresh meat content products. If you look at our puppy as an example, our puppy cuisine, I think it's at 53%, country cuisine's at 47%. So nearly half the bag, or just slightly over half the bag, is fresh meat, with a much smaller amount of meat meal to bring it up to the 80% content.
And the way I like to think of it is, just imagine you're at home and you're doing a roast dinner, okay? And so the bigger proportion of your plate is fresh meat, isn't it? It's the joint of beef and that's on your plate alongside your veggies and your potatoes, etc. So your biggest part of your meal, your nutritious protein side of your meal is the beef. But what do we all do with the roast dinner? Gravy. We all love gravy. Why? It's nice and palatable. It packs in some additional meaty flavours, etc. That's a dried meat that we then rehydrate and add on to our roast dinner. So I like to think of the highest proportion of that meal should be your fresh meat, which Eden is, but we top it up with dried. And a lot of people, there's a lot of bad publicity around meat meal or dried meat. Again, be educated when you look at your bags. Turn that bag around. If the only ingredient is meat meal, and that's the higher percentage of that bag of food, that may not be the quality you're looking for. Turn an Eden bag around, you will see that all of those first ingredients are your fresh meat. And there might be some, and there is, some dried meat added in to increase that palatability, that flavoursomness, to add some extra in there. But always look for the fresh meat first, and that way you'll know you're getting a quality product.
And also from the Eden point of view, Paul, you're very transparent on the bag. You're very transparent with the ingredients and what's in there. And when you look at some brands, when they say, I don't know, it's beef or it's duck, they don't actually say from that perspective. But how do we as a customer, when we look at that bag and it says it's got Suffolk duck or, venison in there from that aspect, how do we really know?
Okay, it's a good question. And again, when the original bags were designed, there was a very interesting dialogue about why not list the menu on the front of the bag. And that's essentially what we've done. We've put the main ingredients on the front so you can see what's in there. And of course, if you turn the bag around and look at the ingredients list, all of the main ingredients are listed with a percentage against them, so you know exactly what's in there. And that was the point. We wanted to open the closet, if you like, on pet food and get people to understand how to read a label and really understand what they were feeding their dogs.
Now, times are difficult at the moment, as we all know, and the cost of dog food, the cost of any food, of putting a meal on the table for family is important. How do we feel about the relationship between the cost of Eden and other?
I think you've got to include the volume of food that you're feeding. So the price per meal is really what you're looking at. Now, don't get me wrong, Eden's never going to be cheap. It's if you only have to look at the ingredients to understand why. But even then, we're still, in some instances, cheaper than similar brands with less meat in. Which is a testament to us keeping the price point as reasonable as we can. But of course, then you've got to include the health of the dog. If the dog's really healthy on the food, then that's also important, that it's you're not incurring vet bills, which obviously can be significant.
And I think Pearl's worked really hard to, especially in the last couple of years, we did a price freeze. We also haven't passed on the full increase in many of the ingredients that we've got. So we've tried to keep our food at a reasonable price, but we are premium. But I like to call it reassuringly expensive. Let's be honest, you do get what you pay for. But if you have a look at a bag of our food, say for example a 12 kilogram bag of our original food, the outlay when you initially buy it feels high to some customers, but say you've got a 10 kilogram adult dog, you're actually only feeding 139 grams of that food a day because of the nutritional content. So that means on a daily basis, you're paying about 96p for that dog's food. Now, compare that to some of the personalised wet foods that are hitting the market at the moment. You will spend in excess of, and sometimes well in excess of, £2 a day. So I think in terms of value, it's reassuringly expensive, and it should be, because the ingredients are fantastic. The food security is fantastic. The provenance, the traceability, the manufacturers we use are premium. It ought to be expensive, but at the same time, because it's so packed with nutrition, the cost per day makes it affordable for most people, and you get a really happy, healthy pet.
And I think in many ways with Eden, another thing to talk about is customer service. I mean, when you look at the fact that it's still run as a family company, then you've still got that closeness, you've still got that talkability, you've got people who are exceptionally passionate within the company who really understand the food. And I know that's a great asset for people, even in the retailers, which you've got, what is it, nearly 200?
Oh, many more than that now.
Yeah. So throughout the country, hopefully we're going to go international. Keep pushing forward.
Well, we are.
See.
We do export.
Yeah.
We export into Europe. We also have some customers in Thailand, and I think that market's becoming even greater. Yeah. It's basically where anybody values quality food.
And another real bonus is we are a British family-run company, and the majority of the food is made in the UK, and we know you've got traceability. We know that you can source where your meat and where your veg and where your ingredients coming from. Another thing we haven't talked about, and sorry if we're just jumping around a little bit here, is your superfood. From that, we forget about this health pack that goes in. That's right. I mean,
it's interesting that every single ingredient in the product is as best that we can make it. You know, I actually exchanged the selenium to an organic compound. This has gone back at the very beginning. It was 10 times the price of the inorganic compound, but to me it made the difference. So yes, superfoods to an extent are just a focus on one of those ingredients. So the obvious one is green lip mussel. It's a joint aid, if you like. Contains joint compounds in its natural form. So we tend to bring that out as a focus on a particular ingredient.
Going back to the traceability as well, Paul talked about ingredients and why is traceability so important? So it's not just nice to know where the food comes from. At times, with all manufacturers, all companies, there might be an issue. So a pet owner may feel as if they fed your food and there's an issue with their pet. What our process guarantees is we can track back via the batch number which batch was that processed in, check the testing, know the farm it came from. So traceability on a daily basis, you sometimes forget how important it is, but the moment you need it, we can guarantee it, which I think in terms of our service level, so what supports the Eden brand, primarily it's the beautiful product that's designed to have happy, healthy pets, but behind the brand is Paul, who's absolutely focused on creating the best premium food he can, a team of people, many of which have been with Paul for the last 10 years, who are just passionate about their own pets and everybody else's. You know, our customer care team, we will have customers that will write in and say, you know, thank you so much for the help and support you gave me. You know, really sad times when the dogs pass, they will say to be able to have spoken to your team on a regular basis was so helpful. It's not maybe just about the food, it's about us having conversations and caring about people's pets. And I think that's a huge difference to a lot of other pet food companies.
And I think with pets as well, I think the fact of it is, you know, they're so engaged, and you felt like with my pet, for argument's sake, you know, he's happy. He's miserable when I go to work, which is great because I know he misses me. He's happy when I get home, you know, from that aspect. And they really are very precious within your family environment. And, you know, it's a major thing. And feeding them the best food and giving them the best life and giving them longevity within their life really just enhances your enjoyment from a psychological point of view and your own personal life as well. From the point of view of you, Paul, what do you feel is the future from Eden's perspective with Kibble? Because really you are a guiding force. I know you hide under a bushel a little bit in the development of Kibble and taking that forward.
Yeah, I think it's, again, an interesting question. The technology is moving on all the time. So the ability to put more fresh meat into the dried food is something that's always being pushed. I think probably ultimate is 100% fresh meat. If you know that I think is the obvious aim. There's other processes as well, some hydrolyzation of the meat, which I know sounds very technical, but it's essentially what the stomach does to the meat when it enters. It goes through a hydrolyzation process. So again, that would be ideal for dogs that may have a challenged digestive system. Something we're looking at very closely. But yeah, I mean, really, it's an interesting question because on day one, I set out to make the best I could, which does lead to a little problem. How do you make that better? And in many ways, you can't. You just have to accept that the changes are relatively small and keep explaining to people why that is.
And Michelle, I know you've been championing recently the launch of your tongue-tying treats, with the launch of your venison and sage, triangle tasty training treats, and lamb, cranberry and mint succulent sausages.
Succulent sausages.
Oh, well, there you go. And do you want to add a bit in it? We'll do another podcast about treats, etc., and the value of those in the future, but that's something that you've been working on.
And I think that is part of the growth of the brand. So how do we take the ethics and the philosophy of quality kibble into other food ranges, like treats, like our wet food, like maybe creating broths and toppers, but it's always carrying through the fundamental ancestral diet packed full of meat. How do you move that forward? Because people do look for alternatives, and we may want to make sure that if somebody wants an alternative, we can offer them the food that they're looking for. So we keep our ear close to the ground in terms of what our customers are saying. We've got lots of great ambassadors. Obviously, people ring in on a daily basis. So we're always listening out for what do our Eden customers want next from Eden. And I will mention, because we've talked a lot about dogs today, there's 13 million dogs in the UK, but there's 12 million cats. You know, so we've got a really exciting new cat kibble coming out in the next few weeks. Which again mirrors this desire to make a food that's in tune with the cat's requirements, which are very different than dogs. If you think about things like hairballs, some of the urinary tract issues cats have, we've taken that same philosophy. Let's make a really brilliant cat kibble.
And that'll be podcast 2, which we're very excited about. from that aspect. I know that you guys have been to a cat cafe today.
We have, yes.
To experience that. So that will be something that we'll be featuring in podcast too as well.
Definitely.
Well, I think it's been great today, and I'd just like to thank both of you. Hopefully we've distilled the myth from the kibble perspective. When you look at nutritionalists, when you look at the behaviourists that, and the ambassadors that you carry, if people can revert to the website and follow from www.edenholisticpetfoods.com. And then we'll speak to you again in the future.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you very much.